to make sure he's safe and remains in good health that they cannot do at the White House. Nora?
That is an excellent point there, Chip. So many other things we need to talk about. Ben Tracy mentioned the Rose Garden event on Saturday that was held to nominate the president's choice to the Supreme Court, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. It was a striking scene. If perhaps you weren't watching on Saturday, it was a packed event. Many folks were not wearing masks. There is video that exists online of Senator Mike Lee, a Republican of Utah, hugging and kissing fellow attendees. It turns out now that we've learned that Senator Lee has tested positive for coronavirus today. We've also learned that the president of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins, has also tested positive. And I understand, Ben, that today we learned that 3 reporters who were also at that event have tested positive, as well as the president, the First Lady. And so the question is, for Dr. LaPook, is it possible that this Rose Garden event was a super spreader event?
Well, we don't, it can take weeks, even months for the CDC to and public health officials to figure out that it's officially a super spreader event. But think about it. That incubation period, now that we know about it, 2 to 14 days, the average time is about 5 days from the time you get exposed till you get symptoms. So the timing is about right. And when you think about that, you have to think that Vice President Pence and also former Vice President Biden are not out of the woods yet. They tested negative today, but as we just discussed, tomorrow is another day, the day after that is another day. If they were infected at some point in the recent past and are just incubating it and not infected but not yet infectious, not yet able to infect others.
So to just talk about that, the timeline on this, because the presidential debate was on Tuesday at Case Western University in association with the Cleveland Clinic, one of the most premier medical facilities in America. Everyone in the facility was supposed to wear masks and receive a COVID test. There is some reporting out there that Chris Wallace may have said to individuals that questioning whether Trump actually got a test that evening. What do we know about that, Ben?
Yes, so Nora, Chris Wallace, who was the moderator of that event, he said today on Fox News that President Trump arrived so late at the event that he was not tested on site, but that there was an understanding amongst the participants that if you had tested negative that day, then there was kind of a gentleman's agreement that that was okay. The White House says the president was tested that morning, as he is tested every day. This does, though, speak to this larger issue of this kind of false sense of security here at the White House, though, based on daily testing. There's always been kind of this disconnect, and we've asked the White House this question many times. Why do you think testing protects the president? Testing is a way of knowing if you have the virus. But for the president to be tested at 8 o'clock in the morning in the West Wing and then spend all of his day, meeting with people, getting on Air Force One, going to Ohio, going to a debate hall, that doesn't mean that the president is negative for the entire day. And that has just been something that the White House has really not seemed to grasp throughout all of this. And that speaks to that issue in the Rose Garden as well, where you have that many people sitting shoulder by shoulder in the Rose Garden. But because the president had been tested that day, they feel that he is secure and safe. They've often referred to him as the most tested man in the country. But obviously testing is not what prevents you from actually getting the virus.
And let me ask you, Ben, about the White House today, because of some of the footage that I have seen, even today at the White House, a false sense of security. There are many staffers walking around without masks.
Yeah, and that's commonplace here. You rarely see any administration officials inside the White House with a mask on or practicing any sort of social distancing. All the journalists who are here on site, we do wear masks inside. I have mine right here. As soon as we stop talking, I put it on, even just to walk on the driveway here. That is not standard operating procedure for the Trump administration. I will say today we did see a couple displays of mask wearing that we don't normally see. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, after one of her hits on Fox News, she walked down the driveway wearing a mask. That is not something I have ever seen her do here. There is certainly a culture here at the White House set by the president that they don't wear masks. And that has just been how this has been now for months here. We'll have to see if that changes. I did talk to one administration official today who said that there likely will be changes in behavior, But it doesn't appear tonight that there's going to be any sort of mandate that people start wearing masks. It will still be a personal choice.
A serious health crisis for the President of the United States, one that we have not seen the likes of in decades, where the President now will be transported to Walter Reed Medical Center and where he will stay for a few days, according to his press secretary, to undergo evaluation and, in their words, out of an abundance of caution. The New York Times reporting today that some of the symptoms that the President is facing include a fever, congestion, and a cough. As Dr. LaPook has said to us, one of the concerns is about when an individual starts to get a lack of oxygen or their oxygen level starts to diminish. That is one of the deep concerns there, and that's why they are taking the President at this hour. The question some have asked, what happens if something terrible were to happen to the President of the United States? The Vice President was tested this morning. He and his wife, according to the White House, tested negative. But the Vice President is at the U.S. Naval Observatory, which is the vice presidential residence, where, according to officials, he remains in good health. I want to return to the idea about the health of both of our presidential candidates, because they were in the same room with one another for more than 90 minutes on Tuesday. They were both supposed to have been tested before they went in by the Cleveland Clinic. As Chris Wallace, the moderator, said, the President arrived too late and, out of a courtesy, was not tested. The reports that we have of these two podiums, while they look somewhat close, they were actually 12 feet 8 inches apart. You can see the Vice President, Joe Biden's wife, wearing his mask. President Trump's family took off their masks while in the audience. And I want to ask you about that, Dr. LaPook, because Joe Biden said today he took 2 tests. He took 2 tests. He says they were both negative. What's the concern if they were more than 12 feet apart? You know, that in some way that Biden could have gotten or contracted coronavirus at that event. How could that be possible?
Well, you know, we've been talking to aerosol scientists, Kim Prather, Lindsey Marr, Don Milton, and there's consensus that this virus can go through the air, not only in droplets, these big hunks of fluid that are greater than 100 microns, but less than 100 microns beyond the 6 feet, and can float out, especially if there's bad ventilation in a room or if there are a bunch of people in there. It can float out and it can accumulate. And we know that, so I'm happy that it's more than 12 feet. That's great, because the farther away you are, the more dilute any kind of virus that's going out in any kind of an aerosol, the more dilute it's going to be. But it doesn't make you safe for sure. And we know from super spreader events, remember the choir practice that was in Washington State, where one person reportedly infected 52. Well, that was with singing. And what we've learned is that when you talk, you can have these aerosols. When you talk loudly or sing, there's even more of them. And of course, there was a lot of loud speech that night. And so that raises my concern and the concern of aerosol scientists I've spoken with, that, you know, maybe there was an increased production of these aerosols. So we'll cross our fingers that that doesn't come to anything, because we don't know. The aerosols can fly across, you can have the fluid across, and you may even have a little bit of virus in there, but what's not really known is to what extent that kind of spread is contributing to the pandemic. And I know the CDC is very concerned about the use of the word airborne, because that implies something like measles or TB, or chickenpox, where it's very, very highly contagious that way, and it has implications for the kind of infection control that you would do. And they said to me when I asked them about this, if it is airborne, it is nowhere nearly as airborne as tuberculosis or measles. So that's the current understanding. But I think theoretically that is a risk right now, and it's a risk for anybody who is indoors.
John, do you think it's stunning that the White House has blocked any members of the White House Corona Task Force from speaking to members of the press? Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, the CDC director, Robert Redfield, that they have been blocked by the White House Chief of Staff from speaking to the press?
Nora, it is the first rule of public health that you are transparent.
while testifying before Congress, where he recently said that wearing a mask may be more powerful than actually the vaccine. In his words, that you could prevent 100,000 deaths in the next 100 days by wearing masks. And it ties exactly to that point that you made previously, Dr. LaPook, about whether the virus is aerosolized or airborne, which I think is really, as you and I have covered this coronavirus pandemic, it's new information and a new understanding of how this coronavirus has spread. As we all recall, we were so concerned about surfaces and the boxes that we receive at home, touching the handles, which still is incredibly important in terms of stopping the spread of infectious disease. Much is spread on your hands and via touch. That's why we are careful about that. But one of our, since you are an MD, I'm just trying to play on TV. I just admire what you and other doctors do, and nurses, is that our understanding, of course, is that this I want to go back to Ben Tracy at the White House, who has additional reporting as well. Ben, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Nora, so a couple of things. The shot that we're seeing here of Marine One on the White House lawn, that's the reverse shot that we don't normally see. That's coming from south of the White House. Usually we see the shot looking at the helicopter where the president would walk across the lawn. We are told that there is a small pool of journalists out there, so we should get video and still images of the president going to the helicopter. The White House has been trying to figure out all day a way to get the president a picture of him or a video of him to show people that he is at least somewhat okay. This might be the way they're going to do it. The president walking perhaps slowly to that helicopter in true President Trump fashion. We would expect some sort of thumbs up if he does do that. I can also tell you that I've talked to a couple of senior administration officials. There has been no formal transfer of power, even presidential duties, to Vice President Mike Pence. He is working from the Naval Observatory. He is helping to fill in for President Trump on some conference calls. But in terms of constitutional duties, those all still reside with President Trump. They will take that on a case-by-case basis based on whatever treatment and test the president is getting at Walter Reed in the coming days.
Right, and just to give people a sense of what Ben is talking about, he is noting that the camera position that we're looking at is essentially from Constitution Avenue, looking across the ellipse, which is where they have the National Christmas tree lighting, into then what is the White House South Lawn, where Marine One lands, or perhaps you may remember where they had the Republican National Convention on that lawn. Usually reporters are able to come out through the Rose Garden and the actual White House to take footage there, but as Ben is pointing out, that's not being provided in a live fashion right now, which in some cases has in the past. But Ben, on that note about the White House wanting to provide a picture of the president walking to Marine One, I can't imagine that the president wants to go to Walter Reed and spend the next 3 days in a hospital.
No, you're exactly right. This is the last thing President Trump wants to do. We know that President Trump, all presidents really, are people who think about their appearance, how this comes off to the general public, to the American people. And we also separate this from the fact that we have an election coming up in 1 month, something that has very much been the preoccupation of President Trump. So this is by far the last thing he wants to be dealing with at this point. And also, you know, we can think about these things in political terms, but there's also just the health terms that we should be concerned about the President of the United States and his family. We should remember that First Lady Melania Trump also has the coronavirus. We're told that her symptoms are mild, that she has a slight cough, so it sounds perhaps as if her condition is not quite as serious. We did not get any sort of update from the White House physician on any sort of treatment that she's been given, if she's been given anything. So that is so far focused on the treatment that she's been given, if she's been given anything. So that is so far focused on the president. But you are right. This is not something that President Trump wants on television right now, especially as he is trying to convince the American people that he deserves 4 more years in the White House.
Dr. LaPook joins us as we await the president's departure from the South Lawn of the White House to head to Walter Reed Medical Center for evaluation, to be there for the next few days, according to the press secretary, where he will be working from the presidential offices there. It is my understanding that there is a suite of private rooms that is there at Walter Reed for the President of the United States for a situation just like this, where he can receive premier care. Dr. LaPook, given that you have treated COVID patients at New York Langone, what's the concern for older Americans? President Trump is 74 years old.
Yeah, we saw without a doubt that 80%, 8 out of every 10 deaths from COVID in the United States were in people who were over the age of 65. And I want to be clear, that doesn't mean an 80% mortality rate. We talked about 15% mortality rate in that population. But that's predominantly where the risk has been. And if you add other risk factors like obesity, you really start to worry. I'm very happy that he's under close observation, because you want to be able to jump on the situation if anything changes. And things can change like that on a dime. So I think he's in the right place at the right time. And I also want to mention, you were talking about the aerosols and about masks. There's epidemiologic evidence that masks work. We know that Taiwan, South Korea, New Zealand, places that adopted the mask use, they did better in terms of coronavirus, getting their arms around it. But now, more recently, these aerosol scientists who have spent their career studying these aerosols, they're doing experiments with masks, and they're showing that these masks, to varying degrees, can prevent the spread of these aerosols. Not 100%, but again, all of our protection for people out there who are thinking, how do they protect themselves? It's layers. We go back to washing hands, wearing a mask. Outdoors is safer than indoors. If you're indoors, try to increase the ventilation. Open a window, crack a door. If you have an air purifier, great. And try to be less dense. And one of the things that we can't hammer home enough is, and Dr. Fauci was telling me this the other day, is bars. Bars, you should not be in an indoor bar right now, and here's why. Because in an indoor bar, people are talking loudly. What happens when you're talking loudly? And you can't hear them. You say, come a little closer. So now you're a little closer to the person, no mask, and they're talking loudly. If you're talking more loudly, you have more aerosols coming out. So that's particularly a dangerous situation right now when we're trying to get this under control, especially as we go into the flu season and the cold. We know respiratory viruses like the cold and the dry, so we're hitting that period right now. We haven't bent the curve enough right now. There is still up to 40,000 cases a day in the United States, and Dr. Fauci is concerned about that. I think this is a time to double down on all of those protective things, and for certain, we should be wearing those masks as directed.
Trump recently traveled to and from 3 states with a packed schedule before he learned late last night. It was a tweet at 12:54 a.m. where the president announced that 3 of the First Lady had tested positive for coronavirus. The White House physician in a statement today revealing that it was a PCR test. We're also hearing that the president is fatigued, but that he is in good spirits, that he has a low-grade fever, and that he has a cough and some congestion, which are the symptoms associated with COVID-19 syndrome. I want to bring in Nancy Cordes, our chief congressional correspondent on Capitol Hill, to give us the latest about, because this is not only an issue for the executive branch, it has now become an issue for the legislative branch, as we're learning about members of Congress who have contracted coronavirus and are in touch with them.
Exactly, Nora. More than a dozen lawmakers have gotten tested just today out of concerns that they too might have gotten coronavirus as a result of being in the president's presence over the past couple of days. And one senator, Mike Lee of Utah, has, we know, tested positive. He was at the White House on Saturday when the president announced his nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to be the Supreme Court nominee. Mike Lee says that he started to have symptoms yesterday. Initially, he thought that perhaps he might have allergies, but he got a test, and he has tested positive. So he says he is now isolating himself for at least 10 days. And then there are a bunch of other Republican lawmakers who were either on Air Force One with the president this week or went to the debate and saw him there, who have gotten tested. And then, Nora, beyond that, there are lawmakers who are just concerned that being in the proximity of those individuals might put them at higher risk. So they went ahead and got tested as well. Dianne Feinstein of California, who is a Democrat and in her 80s. So you can see the concern mounting here. There has never been a consistent testing regimen here on Capitol Hill. Some lawmakers, many aides, felt that there should be some sort of consistent protocol. But Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, both rejected that. They said it was just too difficult and costly to test everybody all the time, every time they came back and forth from their home states to the Capitol. And beyond that, they argued that it was a bad look, since so many Americans can't get the kind of rapid tests that would be available to lawmakers here on Capitol Hill. So what we've just seen unfold in the past 24 hours has caused a lot of lawmakers that I've spoken to sort of take a second look and talk about the fact that perhaps they do need to have some kind of consistent contact tracing regimen and testing regimen in place here at the Capitol, especially because lawmakers are at such high risk. They communicate with one another, they interact with each other, they interact with people back at home, they travel on airplanes and trains to get here, they're going back and forth, and all of those things make this a real petri dish of a location, and we're seeing that again today.
And I want to create a storyline arc here to go to Dr. LaPook right after this, because, Nancy, lawmakers on Capitol Hill have passed multi-trillion-dollar relief packages. And in that relief package included billions and billions of dollars for drug companies and testing and other to develop some sort of a treatment, correct? I mean, it's a huge number of taxpayer dollars being spent to find a treatment or a vaccine.
Absolutely, although Democrats have argued it's not nearly enough, that you have to be spending not just on vaccine development, but that you also have to spend even more on testing, as Speaker Pelosi likes to say, because she has argued, and many medical experts have argued, that you really can't get your arms around the problem and you can't bring the numbers down consistently unless anyone who has any fear that they have been exposed is able to get a test and get results quickly, so that they aren't sitting at home for days at a time waiting to see whether they're positive or not.
Right. And the reason I wanted to point that out, and thank you, Nancy, for making it so clear, all the details, is because now more than 9 months into this pandemic and a massive spending spree or a massive use of taxpayer dollars to put forward this science, we still have no approved treatments for COVID-19. Just let that sink in, because the President of the United States is sick, and he's on his way to Walter Reed to get the very best treatment in America. But there is no approved treatment for COVID-19, and he's at a risk because he's 74, and he is on the borderline of being obese, and he has other health issues that have not been publicly disclosed and that we know about, because the White House has not released his medical records as past presidents have done. But we did learn some details today from the White House. They did tell us that they have given the president an experimental treatment, an antibody cocktail. And I want to ask Dr. LaPook about that. Does it give you any sense of pause that they're giving an experimental treatment to the President of the United States?
You know, Nora, it makes scientific sense, and it has been used in other scenarios. I mean, antibodies have been given as far back as during the 1918 pandemic and even before. But what's new is being able to give somebody these lab-created monoclonals. So in the past, you've heard about convalescent plasma, where you're giving somebody who has recovered, you take their plasma and you give it to somebody. Well, in that plasma is a bunch of antibodies to a lot of things that you don't want, that are not necessary. They're not directed against the COVID-19. But in this case, you're just having in the lab monoclonal antibodies that go right after the COVID-19, the part that attacks you. So it makes sense. It should be safe. It looks like it's safe in terms of the studies that have been done so far, including one that just came out. But, you know, you're right. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It may seem like a long time. It is a long time to all of us, but it's kind of remarkable, actually, how quickly a lot of this has gone in terms of getting remdesivir looked at. A lot of studies, the steroids, the dexamethasone for people who are intubated, and now monoclonal antibodies. So I think what we needed to do all along was to fund public health and fund science better, so that it's not just when the pandemic happens, that's when you're suddenly doing all this work.
Right, and as Ben Tracy has reminded us, President Trump does remain in power at this hour. He's going to be transported to Walter Reed for evaluation for the next few days. But, you know, Dr. LaPook, you and I have talked to many experts. We've talked to the drug companies. We've been talking to the members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And, you know, there have been these questions. What sort of prophylactic treatments are out there that could help protect you? And you really have to kind of dig around and ask some different people about what and so you hear here and there about different vitamins you should be taking, perhaps. And so we did get a sneak peek from the White House today about what the president is on in addition to that experimental drug. The White House and Dr. Sean Conley, who is the president's physician, also said that the president is taking vitamin D, zinc, melatonin, a daily aspirin, and famotidine. That's an antacid better known as Pepsid. What would that be for?
Well, you know, there's no evidence that any of those things are significantly going to help combat the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. I mean, zinc was thought that might somehow decrease the amount of virus that could come in, but that hasn't really been shown in any kind of controlled study. Famotidine, which is Pepsid, I'm an internist and gastroenterologist, that lowers stomach acid. There's a thought they're looking at maybe does that somehow improve outcome. That hasn't been shown yet. It can improve reflux. The other things, vitamin D, melatonin. Melatonin is to help people sleep. Vitamin D and melatonin have not been shown to be effective treatments in this scenario. So I think that, you know, I remember in April, I think I said to you, we were throwing the kitchen sink at COVID-19 because we really didn't know what to do. Now we're hoping to do more directed kind of treatments. And I think the monoclonal antibody does make sense. We're hopeful about it. And there is precedent in past outbreaks that it really does make sense to try.
Dr. LaPook, thank you. We have now been waiting for some time to see the President of the United States to exit the White House and the private residence in order to go on Marine One to Walter Reed so that he can be evaluated there. I want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who covers the Biden campaign, because Joe Biden was in close proximity to the president. He had 2 COVID tests today. They were negative, and he went out campaigning today. And we just heard from him a short time ago. And Ed, what did we hear from former Vice President Joe Biden?
Well, actually, the latest we've heard from him, Nora, good to be with you, is a tweet that he just put out a few minutes ago. I'll just quote from it. He says, "This cannot be a partisan moment. It must be an American moment. We have to come together as a nation." That follows comments he made in Grand Rapids outside a union hall there where he had planned to speak mostly about the economy, where he said he's praying for the first family, hopes they have a speedy recovery. He also said that he had taken 2 COVID-19 tests today before leaving Delaware to fly to Michigan. He is now en route back to Delaware. They canceled some other events that he had planned in the Wolverine State because he frankly got to the state late as they were awaiting the results of those tests. The other thing we've just confirmed in the last few minutes here at CBS is that the campaign is in the process of pulling down negative ads that hit the president for a to-be-determined time. The decision came this afternoon in consultation with Biden and his top advisors. He finished speaking just a few minutes before we got word from the White House that the president is going to be making his way to Walter Reed. And all of this throughout the day today has been so fluid, it's been very difficult to get people in the Biden orbit to talk about the way forward because they, like everyone else, really don't know where this is headed and obviously want to be respectful but understand that there are still 32 days to go until Election Day and that millions of Americans are already casting ballots. So remarkably, sort of a message of unity, not at all critical or aggressive or at all nefarious today from Biden as he spoke, but he also did call out today's jobs report, which showed that the jobless rate is now at 7.9% and said unfortunately there aren't enough jobs being created for the millions of Americans who remain unemployed, showing that he is not necessarily going to completely hold back even as this is happening. But again, he spoke before we got word that the president is headed to Walter Reed.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, he's saying, had a strong message about wearing masks, saying be patriotic. It's not about being a tough guy. It's about doing your part, that wearing, and quoting the CDC director, that wearing a mask could save 100,000 lives in the next 100 days. We are waiting for the president. Yes, Ed.
Just real quick, from a visual perspective, important to note that he kept his mask on the entire time. Usually when he speaks outdoors, he might remove it when he's of a safe distance from cameras and from those assembled. Today, made a very clear statement by keeping it on the entire time.
You got it. I want to bring in Major Garrett now, who our chief Washington correspondent. I understand that Chris Christie, who was involved in I want to talk about what the White House could be doing right now, but they're not doing. And we'll tick through a bunch of different things. I mean, Chris Christie was there in the Oval Office with Hope Hicks, helping the president prep for the debate. It's my understanding that he's just said on another network that he's not even been contacted by the White House about COVID tracing.
Precisely. And he also said that there was no social distancing or mask wearing in debate prep. But let's just focus for the nation's sake, Nora, on today. What were the available options to the White House today? The president put out a tweet around 1 a.m. You've covered that extensively. At 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., the White House could have had its very first briefing to describe the process it's going through, to contact trace anyone the president might have been in contact with, and give the nation a general appraisal of his current condition. It also could have done that at noon or 1 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Time if it didn't want to do it so early in the morning. And by that time, there were reports that the president had mild symptoms. No one in America knows what mild symptoms are. What does that mean? What is the temperature of the president? What is his fever? What are the basic vital signs of the president of the United States? These are knowable facts that can be communicated to the American public. And your experience, Nora, and my experience as a White House correspondent, when these matters have arisen before, they were communicated for a very simple and basic reason of governance. You want to calm and reassure the American public. You want to tell our allies what the situation is. And you want to tell any potential enemy things are under control. And we know what we're doing, and this is what the president's condition is.
So why aren't they doing it, Major? Why do you think they're not doing it?
I have no idea. I'm utterly mystified. I'm utterly mystified, other than they are taking directions from the president himself, who, for whatever set of reasons, and I'm not going to speculate, Nora, it would be dangerous and irresponsible to do so, but for whatever reason, the president is not giving the green light to do this. There could have been a briefing at 4 o'clock this afternoon to say, you know what? The nation needs to know the president's going to go to Walter Reed. Here's the physician to explain what he's going to do at Walter Reed, why there's an office there where he can do presidential duties for the next couple of days. But simply a statement from the press secretary that the president of the United States, now testing positive for a virus that he knows and has told Bob Woodward in the tapes we've all heard can potentially be deadly, is going to be at a hospital for several days. You do not create and leave open a vacuum of speculation about what is going on. You explain at the podium, and you have the physician take questions from lots of reporters to have a give and take. Your give and take with Dr. John LaPook. You and I both have enormous respect for Dr. LaPook and Dr. Agus and Dr. Narula. But I'm sorry, Dr. LaPook is not the person who needs to be talking to the American public right now. The White House physician is. This is an imperative. It is not a judgment call. It's not a jump ball. It's not a 50-50 proposition. This country needs to know what's happening right now, because these pictures before us tell us very little about what's going on. And with very little known, lots of things can be speculated about. This is no time for speculation. This is time for facts, calmly stated, and dealt with in a Q&A fashion. You've done it, Nora, in the White House briefing room. I've done it in the White House briefing room.
You know, Major, it's a really interesting point that you bring up, because we have covered presidents in crisis. And this is where the true measure of a White House and stability and projecting it is incredibly important. 9/11. And remember, worst attack on American soil. George W. Bush heading to ground zero, picking up the bullhorn and portraying strength, even though America had been caught off guard, and there were many questions about why we were caught off guard. Projecting strength. And Katrina. You know, Hurricane Katrina. I'm sure you can add to that list.
I remember the White House briefings after the raid on Osama bin Laden. Not all of the things were put together, but they had a briefing. They took a ton of questions. Some of the answers had to be refreshed or updated or recontextualized later. But there was a sense of mission about talking about something that was a significant event in the life of an entire country and taking questions for a long period of time about what the implications of that were. That's exactly where we are right now. This is a significant event in the life of a nation. And the nation needs to be spoken to. And the nation needs to be spoken to by the President of the United States and those who speak on his behalf, the doctors who treat him, and the implications of whatever that treatment is. When you're talking to Dr. John LaPook about a cocktail of things which he believes has some possible beneficial impacts, the country should hear that from the White House. That's where it's happening. That's where the decision is being made. That's where its beneficial impacts will be measured. We should ask a question to them. How are you going to measure it? How will you know? When will you get back to us? How can we evaluate this as a country? We're all invested in this. No one is not invested in this moment, in this country. Everyone is. And to have an entire day go by, Nora, an entire day without a single briefing from the White House about fundamentals, basics, I'm just mystified.
I want to point out that President Obama has just said at a fundraiser for Kamala Harris that he wants to extend our best wishes to the President of the United States and the First Lady. We hear a similar message coming from the former Vice President Joe Biden, who said this can't be a partisan moment. It has to be an American moment. We have to come together as a nation, as people are pulling for the health of President Trump. And you know, I said this earlier, Major. I mean, this is the most serious health crisis for a president since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. We've got the president heading to Walter Reed for 3 days to undergo evaluation. Shouldn't we hear from the chief of staff or the vice president?
One would think so, Nora. I'm not sure if you're coming back to me or not, but I'll take it if you are. And to your point just a second ago about President Obama's remarks, former Vice President Joe Biden's remarks, this is not a partisan atmosphere. There is no partisan danger right now. There is only the need to inform. And the need to inform falls upon the White House. It is incumbent upon any White House to fill that void and do so with as many facts as you can assemble. And there are many benefits from that, some of which are political, but many of them are just about bringing the country to a place of common understanding. I'm not even going to go to the sort of bring the country together. No, just give the country a common understanding of what is being done, and what is the sense of the near-term future.
And
no one can predict this for a week in advance, but they can predict it for the next 2 or 3 days.
And for those that think that this may be criticism of the White House, we should point out that the White House did not release that Hope Hicks had contracted coronavirus. One of the president's closest advisors, dare say friend, they didn't release that. It was a reporter who broke that news.
Yes.
And a reporter who was able to allow the White House press corps to know this is an issue. She'd been around not only other White House staff, but also reporters and other individuals who need to take care of themselves and their families had they been in contact with her. The details that we're receiving today about the president having a low-grade fever, that has not come from a White House official. It comes from our reporters speaking to sources who are sharing that information with the press corps for a reason.
Right.
Because this is a democracy, and people want to know about the health of the leader of the free world.
Right, and Nora, neither you nor I know what a low-grade fever means. We don't know. There's a number. The country needs the number, and I'm not criticizing, I'm observing. And observing is important right now, because what is observable is very little. And in an atmosphere where you can observe very little, especially in a country where we have a lot of speculation on social media, a lot of contested voices on social media, I would argue there has never been a greater imperative to cut through that, to not silence it, but to at least offer factual information on behalf of the President of the United States and the First Lady. Okay. She's also tested positive. The nation wants to know about her.
We are hearing right now, and let me bring in Ben Tracy at the White House, that the president may be walking out any moment, that he has a mask on, that we are not provided footage from the White House. That will be what we call tape playback, because we are looking at the shot coming from Constitution Avenue across the South Lawn. Ben?
We will eventually see that video of the president. We're told that he's actually now on the helicopter, so just in the next couple of seconds, you'll start to see those rotors start turning on top of Marine One, and they'll try to get out of there pretty quickly. We weren't given any explanation for the delay, why the helicopter sat there for so long, but I can tell you that just a couple of minutes after the helicopter clears the airspace here at the White House, what will happen is the small group of reporters that are out there, they will literally run back into the White House and they will turn around that tape, so we will be able to see the president board Marine One. This is kind of a routine process that happens here at the White House all the time. We just don't see it from this vantage point. We're usually seeing it from the point where you can see the president come out there underneath that awning on the South Lawn and get on the helicopter himself. I also just wanted to mention that we have heard from the president's son, Eric Trump. He just recently tweeted, Donald Trump is a true warrior. He will fight through this with the same strength and conviction that he uses to fight for America every day. I ask you to join me in praying for his recovery. So obviously the Trump family very much on people's minds today as well. We should mention that the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, they were also tested here at the White House today. They tested negative. They would have been in close quarters with, obviously, the president and Hope Hicks as well. You can see that rotor moving there on top of Marine One. Soon you'll see the helicopter lift up. It will take a very direct left turn or right turn, depending on which way you're looking at the helicopter, and then it flies directly over the South Lawn, over the Washington Monument and out to Walter Reed. So this should all happen now in the next couple of minutes. We can actually hear it here from our position at the White House, those rotor blades whirling on top of Marine One.
This is a historic moment, watching a president who is sick with the coronavirus and COVID-19, who we're told has a cough, congestion, and a low-grade fever, being transported now to Walter Reed National Medical Center for what the press secretary says is a few days of evaluation, where he will also be able to work there. Just so you know, based on our understanding of what this facility is like that the president is going to, he has a facility at Walter Reed that has all the bells and whistles that a president would need to be able to run the country remotely. It's actually called the Medical Executive Treatment Unit. It's run by a dedicated staff of doctors, nurses, and technicians. They switch over from their daily duties in order to care for the president. It has separate communications, eating facilities, Secret Service bases. It has lodging for family members. It has a lot of office space there. It is designed for a moment like this. I don't know whether it's designed for dealing with infectious diseases, but I can imagine that the military thought of that, knowing that they think of just about everything and planning for that. But I think we should take a moment now to think about the health of the President of the United States and his family, the health and security of our country. We hope that the president is treated successfully. That the security of America remains at the top priority of the President of the United States while he has his offices and full facilities there, the Vice President working from the Naval Observatory. And that's why we hear President Obama wishing him and the First Lady well. That's why we hear President Trump's opponent, Vice President Biden, also saying this cannot be a partisan moment. We must all come together as a nation. I want to bring in Dr. John LaPook one more time. When the president arrives there as a doctor, what do you imagine will happen? How will he be evaluated?
They're going to do intake. They're going to do vital signs, blood pressure, pulse, oxygen level, a bunch of blood tests. I'm sure there are certain blood tests, inflammatory markers, so-called, that go up in people who have severe COVID-19 disease. So they're going to look at all those markers. I don't know whether he's had any imaging, chest X-ray, chest CT. All of these things can help figure out what's going on. And I want to echo, Major Garrett, of course, he's always so smart about what he says. When you talk about giving somebody an experimental treatment like this convalescent, like the monoclonal antibodies, it is an experiment, and you want to have as much facts as possible about it, the risk and what are the benefits. And medicine is an eternally humbling profession. I mean, if you've been a doctor for 5 years and you haven't had your head you've had your head handed to you, believe me. If you have any hubris left after 5 years, you're in the wrong profession. So I think it's really important to stay humble about it, to understand that the situation could change any moment, that you want to get all the facts. And when you're thinking about giving an experimental treatment that makes sense scientifically but hasn't been proven yet to be safe and effective, you want to have all the facts. And I think Americans do deserve to know exactly what the health of the president is right now. But of course, we all wish him the best, and we hope that whatever treatment he gets is successful.
And Walter Reed is just about under 10 miles away from the White House, and so they will be there very quickly. We have reporters, as well as the White House pool is actually on the ground at Walter Reed, as the White House press pool was notified of this potential movement earlier in the day. We've been reporting now for just about the past hour as we waited for the president to depart from the South Lawn. I want to bring in Ben Tracy at the White House, who has additional reporting. Ben?
So, Nora, I just saw some playback of the video of the president leaving the White House, which everyone will soon see in a couple of minutes once it's turned around to all of the networks. I can tell you the president was wearing a navy blue suit. He was wearing a ball cap. He waved at the reporters. He gave a thumbs up. He was walking on his own, and I will say he was walking fairly briskly. He then boarded the stairs of Marine One. He actually tapped the handrail a couple of times as he was getting on the helicopter. So he did appear to be in good spirits despite what is currently going on. We will all see that video here in just a few minutes. He did not stop to talk to any of the press that was outside on the lawn. We're told that Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was accompanying the president. First Lady Melania Trump was not. That is understandable given that she has coronavirus. Obviously, they want to keep her isolated here at the White House.
And Dr. LaPook, we watch now as the president departs the White House. A walk that no doubt the president did not want to take as part of his presidency. I can't recall a time we've seen the president wearing a mask while departing the residence onto Marine One. You can see his military aide carrying what is called the football, the nuclear codes accompanying the President of the United States, as well as other members of the White House staff, all wearing masks. The president's detail accompanying him, and also putting their own health at risk, we should note, because of the deadly nature and infectious nature of coronavirus. As Ben noted, the First Lady of the United States is not accompanying the president at this hour. Our understanding is that she is remaining at the White House. The First Lady of the United States is 50 years old. The President of the United States, 74 years old. There is increasing concern for older Americans when you contract the coronavirus. It is a cruel infection, and certainly for older Americans it does. It just infects them differently. It is the nature of the virus. Even for healthy 70-year-olds, it can be a very cruel disease. And I'll ask Dr. LaPook to just, as you've known many healthy 70-year-olds who contracted the coronavirus and got very, very sick. And
who have died, unfortunately. And it was one of the crushingly disappointing things about treating all the patients at NYU Langone at the beginning of this crisis in April, that so many of the people got sick so quickly, and they died despite our best efforts. Fortunately, our treatment has gotten better. It's not perfect, of course. It's gotten better, and we do know what to look for in terms of people going south, as we say, and starting to deteriorate. So again, I love how he walked. I love the little taps that he did at the end on the banister there, on the guardrail. It showed a little bit of pizzazz in him. But I suspect that inside of him, without projecting too much, there's a true understanding of the seriousness of the moment, and just hoping that things turn out okay.
People are looking at this shot and noticing multiple helicopters. Marine One always flies in a group with identical helicopters. Sometimes there's actually as many as 5 of them. One helicopter carries the president. Others serve as decoys in case there would be an assassin or something like that. It is a precaution that's always worked for the President of the United States. There are multiple helicopters, so that's why you're seeing now what looks like multiple versions of Marine One. That is how they practice. If you've ever been to the Washington, D.C. area, sometimes you see them running the practice runs, the multiple helicopters together. That is part of the safety and security that accompanies the President of the United States because of his great and vast power that accompanies the President. And, John, I hate to even think about this, but I noticed because the President does travel with such an entourage, even though if you or I as civilians were to get COVID-19, we would be required to isolate, totally isolate. And yet, in this case, really, the President of the United States can't isolate. He has to have some people around him.
Yeah, but those people are going to be, I checked with some public health officials about this, they'll be in full PPE, full protective equipment.
At the hospital, but the ones that traveled with him on Marine One.
Oh, on Marine One, they actually even then should have masks. They should have visors. They probably won't have gowns, but the big spread is through the air. So if you have a good mask, I don't know if it's N95 that they have, and a visor, that's something that certainly would be recommended for people in close proximity to him. In addition to gowns and gloves.
Yes, sure, absolutely. And I want to note now we see Marine One. It was obviously a very quick ride across town, less than 10 miles, as that has landed now at Walter Reed. Major Garrett continues to join us. Major?
So I noticed, Nora, those boarding Marine One, a much smaller staff accompaniment for obvious reasons for the president. And this goes back to the need for the White House to explain how this is all going to play out. How will the president deal with his obligations, his duties, his responsibilities as president while he's at Walter Reed, because the White House says he's going to work there for a few days. Is this going to be a teleworking White House for the next couple of days? It looks like it will be. That would be something that the White House could and should fill in terms of the workability of the president under these very challenging circumstances. When you saw those boarding Marine One, you quite accurately pointed out those were all, or at least predominantly to my eye, military aides. I did not detect anyone from the senior White House staff. Mark Meadows might have joined the president. I didn't see, but it would be logical for the chief of staff, but very few others. So this raises just general, basic continuity of government issues and questions, all of which the White House, because it's formulated this plan, can and should answer sooner rather than later.
Major Garrett, thank you. It is 6:30 on the East Coast, 3:30 in the West. We just want to recap for a moment for viewers who are just tuning in to this CBS News special report. President Trump has just landed at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center after testing positive for coronavirus overnight. The president is going to be there for a few days to be evaluated. We understand from White House sources that the president is experiencing fatigue, that he has had a low-grade fever, a cough, and congestion. As you can see, the Marines accompanying the President of the United States exiting beforehand, just ahead of the president. The president will be staying in something called the Medical Executive Treatment Unit, which is staffed by doctors, nurses, technicians, the finest from America's military and medical professionals, to care for the president out of what the press secretary is calling an abundance of caution. As Dr. LaPook, our chief medical correspondent, has noted, one of the concerns is the president's age. Because he is 74 years old and obese, he is at risk for complications from coronavirus. And the President of the United States wearing his mask, accompanied by his White House Chief of Staff, who is also wearing protective gear, who I believe the White House reported this morning had tested negative. you're getting a sense of the entourage, though, that accompanies the President of the United States. An official White House photographer, his staff aide, chief of staff, military aides, likely medical professionals as well with him, even as they have tried to reduce the footprint for safety and security of those who accompany the president. We were told by the White House that they have already given the president an experimental treatment of remdesivir, which is not yet approved. There is no approved, it is produced by Regeneron. I misspoke there. Regeneron is the name of the company that produces this antibody cocktail, an experimental treatment given to the president. And I say it's experimental because there is no approved treatment for COVID-19. We also learned from the president's physician today that he has been taking vitamin D, zinc, melatonin, and something that's similar to Pepsid, as well as a baby aspirin. And there, the president's motorcade, as well as the White House pool, that's a press pool that accompanies the president to record what has happened to the President of the United States. Ben Tracy is our White House correspondent, and so Ben, while we've been able to watch the president and we have received 2 statements today from the president's doctor, we have not been able to interview or get briefed by the president's medical team, correct?
That's true. Basically, they put out 2 statements. This is one of them. It's very short, basically just saying that the president has been treated with this experimental drug cocktail and that he's fatigued. So not a lot of information about what is currently going on with the President of the United States. They have been trying to figure out all day long how they would get the president somehow on camera, some way for the American people to see them. We obviously have now seen that play out here over the course of the last 20 minutes or so. I'm not sure if you caught it, but while the president was in that brief motorcade there, you actually saw him wave out the window. This is a president who is always aware of where the cameras are. And you saw him look over and obviously give that wave, wanting people to know that he is okay, or is at least okay as you can be with the coronavirus. If people are wondering why the helicopter and then the motorcade, there's a landing zone there at Walter Reed, and then there's a very brief motorcade to the door that the president would enter to go to those suites that you've been talking about at Walter Reed, where we're told by our colleague David Martin that this is really a home away from home, a little mini White House there for the president, where he'll have eating facilities, communication facilities. He'll be able to do all the work of the presidency from that area of the hospital.
Dr. John LaPook is our chief medical correspondent, and Dr. LaPook, this is a disease that is particularly cruel to older Americans. What is the mortality rate for those in the president's age group?
Well, anybody 65 and over, the mortality rate is about 15%. That's 15%. That's 65 and above. He's 74. He's also obese, so that's not factoring in that. And we know that about 80% of the deaths from COVID-19 that have happened in the United States have been in people 65 and over. And again, that's not to say that his mortality rate is anywhere near that. The odds are that he should survive this. He should recover. But one thing we know about the coronavirus, the one thing that's predictable about coronavirus is that it's unpredictable. And I applaud the instinct to bring him under closer observation, get him to a place where you can do all the testing, all the close follow, and all the treatment if needed.
And I want to ask you about that, because there's no doubt that the President of the United States does not want to be staying in a hospital tonight. Nobody wants to be staying in a hospital. That's the last place any of us want to be, even though Walter Reed is a spectacular military facility. Explain what happens. COVID-19 is the syndrome that you develop from the SARS-CoV-2. Correct. What is this, they call it that inflammatory storm that develops? Why is it, and I mean, my guess is that's why they want him at Walter Reed out of this abundance of caution, because what is it that the coronavirus does that is so concerning to medical professionals? It's
the so-called cytokine storm, and it's really an unfortunate overreaction of the immune system. So the body gets attacked by the virus, and then the immune system just roars in, and it overdoes it. It's like bombing itself, and it ends up damaging from the inflammatory response not only the lungs but other parts of the body. And the problem is that, you know, if you just, and I've had this with my patients and following them at home, You think, okay, just stay at home and let's see how you're doing. And then suddenly they can take a turn for the worse very quickly. Most of them don't. But if they do take a turn for the worse, you have to be on them like that because they can deteriorate so quickly. And that's why, undoubtedly, he's coming in just for close observation and the so-called abundance of caution, the famous abundance of caution.
Want to bring in 60 Minutes correspondent John Dickerson, who has covered a number of presidents, also written books about the presidency. And John, I'm still almost a little short of breath watching this scene of Marine One taking off from the South Lawn. A health crisis for our president that certainly brings up so many questions about not only his presidency, but also our nation. Your thoughts?
Well, that's right. I mean, just everything you've been reporting in such detail, it feels so much different than the news as we experience it in our public life, in part because we're in the middle of a campaign. I mean, these are all very serious issues surrounding the president. There's no foolishness. Everybody is marching according to a very strict and determined plan. It wasn't always this way. I mean, you had certainly Woodrow Wilson's stroke was clouded in secrecy. Then Eisenhower had a heart attack. The press couldn't learn anything. They were misled at first that it was something he'd eaten. John Kennedy was misled the press regularly as a candidate and then as a president. And so we are already, although the information has not been the result of an interview with any officials, we are already seeing and watching more in real time than certainly with previous presidents. And unlike, say, President Reagan, when he was shot and there was a pell-mell rush to try to put protocols in place and figure out who was in charge, and there was that famous instance in which Al Haig asserted that he was in charge when that was not really the case. This is a relatively slow-moving operation, and so protocols are in place for how to handle it, as you've been detailing, where he will go, the ability he has to still do his work and job there from Walter Reed. At the moment, we're showing all of the preparation that is in place for a president in this kind of situation.
And John, just the particulars of this, I mean, the critical time that it comes at, 30 days away from an election, the president trying to nominate someone to the Supreme Court, just following the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the concerns that event in the Rose Garden to nominate her may have been a super spreader event because three White House reporters now have COVID, a senator, the president, the first lady, as well as the president of Notre Dame, all contracting coronavirus. We don't know from that event, but so much of this seems so grave at such a critically important time when voters are voting now to decide where did we take this country for the next 4 years.
That's right. I mean, the stakes were already high, and this is a destabilizing event at a time when Americans are pretty jittery. And also you have America's enemies, adversaries, who've been circling around the election. We know they have been sowing chaos, trying to upset the political conversation. And so you have a very loaded atmosphere. And you have certainly one nice thing to see is a reassertion of a norm, a bipartisan norm, that has been pretty strongly reasserted, which is the basic human care for the President of the United States that's come from Republicans and Democrats. But the election has not been postponed, and so it hovers over all of this, and this is the key issue of the election. And so the President is now a player in that in a way he certainly never expected to be.
And John, also at the same time, when this election has largely been a referendum on the president's leadership and his handling of the coronavirus epidemic, the president himself has now contracted that very virus. In part, some say because of his failure to follow public health rules.
Well, that's exactly right. He's a participant now as a patient and not just as the President of the United States. And everything we have seen, including the debate this week, was the president trying to get the conversation on something other than the pandemic, because before this instance, the country had a highly negative view of his handling of it. What this instance, what these events will ensure is that the pandemic will now be at the center of the conversation for weeks to come and perhaps all the way until Election Day.
John Dickerson, thank you. The president's favored communication is Twitter. And so tonight he has released a video on Twitter that he recorded shortly before leaving the White House for Walter Reed. Let's listen.
I want to thank everybody for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out. The First Lady is doing very well. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will never forget it. Thank you.
John, I'm just struck. John Dickerson, he said, I think I'm doing very well. This president doesn't hesitate.
You're exactly right. I mean, this is COVID-19 is relentless. It waits for no man, and the president has often liked to talk about other things or downplay it, and he is staring right into the camera and talking about the reality of it. And as you note, the extraordinary confidence that the president has on any issue, warranted or not, in this case, he's much more tempered in his remarks about his own condition.
Yeah, it was remarkable to me, that tone, to hear him hesitate and say, I think I'm doing well. And that certainly is up to the doctors who will evaluate him now at Walter Reed. John Dickerson, thank you. Also want to bring in, we've got an incredible team of everyone here at CBS News doing all of their reporting. Every arm of this organization is moving to get all of you watching the latest information. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill, as this is not just an executive branch problem, but it has now also affected the legislative branch. Nancy.
And Nora, we've been talking for some time now about the fact that the public is really in the dark about some key details here. Well, I'll tell you who else has really been in the dark: the leaders of the legislative branch. Speaker Pelosi's aides confirmed to me that she was not informed in advance about the president's condition or the fact that he would be going to Walter Reed. Same goes for Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. That is not entirely surprising. The relationship between Speaker Pelosi and the President of the United States is virtually non-existent at this point. They have not met in person for nearly a year. They don't speak on the phone either. They have made it very clear what they think of one another in very, very scathing terms. But it certainly shows that there has been something of a breakdown in communication between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And I can tell you from talking to aides here on Capitol Hill all day, there is this sense that they are waiting for another shoe to drop, that they are worried that more people here on Capitol Hill will test positive, either individuals who interacted with the president himself or who interacted with one another here on Capitol Hill, a place where the protocols of social distancing and mask wearing are not always followed. We saw that many times this week.
And Nancy, we also just learned from moderator Chris Wallace of Fox that before that debate on Tuesday, where there were strict protocols, where everyone inside was supposed to have taken a COVID test, wear masks, we are learning from Chris Wallace today that because the president and his family arrived late, they did not take tests on site, and that it was the honor system that was used.
And not only that, Nora, but the president's family, those in his entourage, very openly took their masks off once they got into the hall and were sitting in their seats. They didn't give any explanation for that. It was very noticeable that those on the Biden side of the room were wearing their masks. Those on the Trump side weren't. It's not clear what kind of point they were trying to make. There's also reporting that they rejected an offer of masks from staffers from the Cleveland Clinic. So it was very clear protocols had been set out in advance. Everyone agreed to them, not just the White House, not just the Biden team, but journalists and people who were attending the debate to watch it. But one side decided, for some reason, to flagrantly disregard the rules. And now, as a result, you've got a lot of people up here on Capitol Hill, important decision makers, who are worried about their own health.
You heard former Vice President Joe Biden saying today about wearing masks, be patriotic. It's not about being a tough guy. It's about doing your part. Nancy, I want to talk to you about what you are going to be covering, both of us are going to be covering, is the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the Supreme Court. Those hearings happen in just over a week in the United States Senate. Her nomination was held in the Rose Garden last Saturday. in an event that was striking not only because of her incredible biography and the historic choice, but also the close quarters with which people sat. And there's Senator Mike Lee hugging, shaking hands. You see the Attorney General there with Franklin Graham. There's hugging. And now we know that Senator Lee has coronavirus.
Yep. And again, what's so striking about watching that, Nora, is to think about how careful so many of us have been not to hug the people we love or the people we know, because we are so concerned that we might pass something on to them or they might give something to us. But nevertheless, Senator Lee has now tested positive. He says he's going to be in isolation for at least 10 days. And Senator Lee is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee that will be considering Judge Coney Barrett's nomination. And so he hopes that he will be back in time to question her in person, but if not, he'll have to do it remotely. Late this afternoon, the Senate's leader, Mitch McConnell, said that there will be no change to the Senate schedule. The Senate will be in session next week. Lindsey Graham, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, says that the hearing is going ahead as planned. But I'll tell you, Nora, it was striking this week to see dozens of Republican senators meeting in these one-on-one settings with Judge Coney Barrett, sometimes 6 feet apart, sometimes not, never wearing masks. Now, it was reported earlier today that Coney Barrett actually had coronavirus earlier this summer and recovered, so that may mean that she's unlikely to contract it again. But certainly we were in hearings this week, in interviews, in those one-on-one meetings again and again where lawmakers were not wearing masks. And so it's really an open question up here whether everyone who's supposed to be involved in that confirmation process is going to be healthy enough to participate.
Right. What we've learned in covering this pandemic is that one way to stop the spread, it's not just testing. It is what the South Koreans called triple T: testing, tracing, and treatment. Contact tracing. So that if you find out if someone tests positive, you got to find out everybody around them, and they have to isolate so that they don't continue to spread it. Is your understanding, is anyone been contacted that's been in touch with Senator Mike Lee? Are there other senators, lawmakers, staff that are quarantining? Have they done the contact tracing?
Nora, there has been no established contact tracing program here on Capitol Hill. The Office of the Capitol Physician simply doesn't have the resources to make that happen. It's usually sort of an honor system. You would expect that Senator Lee and his staffers would then reach out to people who have been in close proximity over the past few days to let them know. But no, there is no formalized contact tracing system. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the lead Democrat in the Senate, argued today that Congress really does need to establish one if it wants to be able to come and go safely. Whether that's actually going to happen remains to be seen. There's been this very laid-back approach to the whole coronavirus situation here on Capitol Hill from the beginning. Not a lot of tests available, certainly not a lot of social distancing in some of these settings that we are in, but it's never too late to put some new procedures into place, so we'll see if that happens.
I think that is fair to call an embarrassing failure of the United States government on what is a basic public health protocol that is well known, not just for the coronavirus, but for every other infectious disease that this country has faced before. In some cases, there's mandatory reporting for certain diseases in this country, like HIV, so that you can do contact tracing. I mean, this is just an utter failure, an utter failure.
And it's interesting, Nora, because a lot of aides, congressional aides, have been saying that from the beginning, and they have really been making some noise about the fact that they don't feel safe enough when they are here. But it is really congressional leaders who have balked at putting additional measures, especially the testing, into place, because they felt that it would send the wrong message to the public if they were able to have access to rapid tests, for example, when so many people in the American public can't get access to it. So they've actually rejected those tests when they were offered to them by the White House. So it'll be interesting to see after this scare whether they change their minds.
Remarkable indeed, and what this will do to the proper functioning of different parts of our United States government. Just 30 days to go before an election day. I want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who covers the Biden campaign. And we've seen Vice President Joe Biden, who is 77 years old. He's older than President Trump, who is in better physical shape, but is older, has been remarkably careful. It's why he's been mocked for campaigning in his basement, but he was on the road in Grand Rapids, Michigan today. What was the message he had?
Unity, quite frankly. Nora, he began his remarks by saying that he and his wife, Jill, are praying for the first family, hoping that they have a speedy recovery, but made the broader point that the country needs to work on expanding testing to the entire country so that, as he said, frontline workers, waitresses, or people who work in factories can have just as much access and easy access and free access to COVID testing as people who are under Secret Service protection as he and the president are. And later tweeting that this is a moment for the country to come together and it shouldn't be partisan. Late this evening, shortly after we got word that the president would be headed to Walter Reed Medical Center, the Biden campaign said that they've decided to take down negative advertising on the air and online, at least for now. Remember, the Biden campaign is spending tens of millions of dollars in at least a dozen battleground states and across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube to get out their message that is mostly critical of the president's handling of the pandemic. So for now, at least, they're in the process of taking down those ads. Doesn't mean, if you're watching at home, that you might not see one, because it can sometimes take a day or two to pull advertising off the air and off your Facebook feeds, but they're in the process of doing that. We should also point out, Nora, remember, everyone involved in presidential politics, at least many of us, were in Cleveland earlier this week for that debate. And today there were several follow-up questions put to the Commission on Presidential Debates and the Cleveland Clinic, which, as you've pointed out, is one of the world's most premier medical entities, about how it was allowed for people to sit in the audience without a mask, despite the fact that they had spent several weeks assuring the campaigns and reporters who were headed there that everyone would be required to wear a mask. We noticed just before the debate, as we were in the hall, the Trump family and other members of the Trump entourage walked out to take seats without wearing a mask. Well, the Cleveland Clinic today, in follow-up statements, reiterated that individuals entering the debate hall were masked and in some cases removed their masks once seated. A Cleveland Clinic physician did offer audience members masks, but some did not adhere to the requirement. On the question of testing and whether everybody got tested before they walked into the room, the Cleveland Clinic said that both candidates, including the candidates themselves, had been tested and tested negative by their respective campaigns. I can tell you today, a lot of people, including this reporter who were in the room, had to go get tests to make sure that everything was copacetic. This reporter tested negative. We know other colleagues have gone as a precaution because there were Trump campaign officials around talking to reporters. We didn't get very close to any of them that have been mentioned as having been with the president. But, for example, Donald Trump Jr., who stuck around after the debate to talk to you and Gail, did come up and was on all the various press risers, removed his mask to appear on television, even though most of us who had been on television kept our masks on. So, you know, it's an example of it. And obviously the commission, which did not respond to comments today, was unable to enforce those rules.
And certainly questions as that debate was held at the Cleveland Clinic, the level of contact tracing that they will do as a matter of what should be protocol and practice. Thank you, Ed O'Keefe. Want to bring in Dr. John LaPook on this historic day, the most serious health crisis for a president of the United States since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. The president now safely at Walter Reed, being evaluated by physicians. What are you most concerned about?
I'm most concerned about his respiratory status, really. I was happy to see when he was talking just now that he did not seem short of breath to me. He was breathing normally. He seemed okay. Of course, you pointed out, he said, "I think I'm okay." It's sobering. And I've been in that situation with patients when you're in an unpredictable situation. I suspect it's been communicated to him about the fact that you can be okay for a week or so and then you can deteriorate. So I think it's very important that they follow his respiratory status and, of course, all the other complications that can happen with COVID-19. Increased clotting, it can affect pretty much every system in the body. But I want to say something about what Ed just said, what Ed O'Keefe just said, because it's a really good teaching point. He was exposed, it's Friday, he was exposed on Tuesday. He got a test today that was negative. Ed, I love you, but you're not out of the woods, and it's very important for people to understand that. That's just 3 days ago. The incubation period is 2 to 14 days. That means that today probably would have been the first day, if you were infected, that you would have tested positive, and really until 14 days from the time of possible exposure, you are at risk, and so is anybody else. And that's why it's so important, anybody else who is in close contact. Now, we don't know what your risk is. If you were across the room and there was a good ventilation, we don't know any of that. So we don't know whether you really were truly, Ed. I don't mean to turn it to your doctor, but I think it's a good teaching point for everybody. We don't know what your risk of contact was. But if somebody was in close contact with the president, then that person needs to be in quarantine. Now, the terminology. Quarantine is when you're exposed to somebody who's infected, you go into quarantine. If you're infected yourself, you go into isolation. And one of the reasons why people who are in close contact with somebody who's infected get tested, even if they have no symptoms, remember, up to about half of people don't have symptoms, is because they want to see whether they potentially spread it to other people. So you can do the shoe leather of doing contact tracing that you talked about so importantly, Nora.
Dr. John LaPook, thank you. Ben Tracy's at the White House. And Ben, the symptoms that we know that the president is experiencing, what do we know about those?
Well, what the White House has said is that he's fatigued. We've also been told that the president has a slight cough. You know, I want to go back to that video that when we heard the president actually speak, you pointed out those lines where he said, "I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out." This is a president that speaks in declarative sentences, and I think in his presidency, that is one of the few, if only, moments of vulnerability that we have actually seen from President Trump. So that gives you a sense of the gravity of this moment for him as he's taken to the hospital tonight.
Ben Tracy at the White House. And Ben, the last word that we got from the White House is that he would be there for a few days. Is that correct?
Say that again.
The last word that we got from the White House is that he would be there for a few days. Is that correct?
Yes, they say he'll be there for a few days. They're going to run some tests, and he's going to be able to work from Walter Reed and carry on the duties of the presidency, they say.
Ben Tracy, thank you. And just to recap, the President of the United States has departed the White House. Will spend the next few days at Walter Reed under evaluation out of an abundance of caution. The President, 74 years old, who is technically obese. There is serious concern about his health as he is experiencing a fever, cough, congestion. The White House saying that he is being given an experimental treatment at this hour because there is no proven treatment for COVID-19. One can rapidly deteriorate because of this disease, and that's why he is under the best medical care at this hour. Our coverage will continue on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or on our CBS News app. There will be much more in your local news on this CBS station, and for some stations, the CBS Evening News is next. This